Hi, this is Chris Young. Welcome to a special extended episode of an extended episode of my podcast, Contemplating Life. In episode 76A, I told a parable about a man who worked himself to death trying to write down everything that he knew. And I thought I would illustrate it using AI-generated images. So I wanted to tell you about that. I went to ChatGPT and said, generate an image of a man in the upper room of a castle, sitting at a desk surrounded by disorganized stacks of papers and large books. In the background are extensive piles of books. So that was my prompt, and I came up with exactly the image I wanted to see. And here it is. ChatGPT said,
here is the image of a man in the upper room of a castle, surrounded by disorganized stacks of papers and large books, with extensive piles of books in the background. Let me know if there's anything you'd like adjusted.
So with that success, I wanted to create a second image of him after he had died by working himself to death. I added the prompt, generate another image with the man slumped over his desk, deceased. And here's what I got.
Here's the image of the man slumped over the desk, deceased, surrounded by scattered papers and books in the dim, somber light of the upper room of the castle. Let me know if you'd like any further changes.
Well, that isn't exactly what I was looking for. I wanted him seated at the desk with his head down. Here he is lying out flat on top of the desk. Not what I wanted. So I added the prompt, show him seated at the desk with his head face down.
Here is the image of the man seated at the desk with his head face down, surrounded by scattered papers and books, in the somber and dimly lit castle room. Let me know if there are any further adjustments you'd like.
I ended up going with that image as well, even though the background didn't exactly match the background of the first image. In this third image, the books are just piled up. There are no bookshelves. I probably could have created more prompts to say something like, make the background image look more like the first one, but I didn't want to spend that amount of time with it. So anyway, that was my mini experiment with ChatGPT. Here's the parable as I told it in the previous episode of the podcast, with the images edited into place. I heard a parable once about a man who spent his entire life collecting knowledge. One day he realized that all that knowledge would be lost when his life was over. So he set about the task of trying to write down everything he knew so that he could share it with the world and leave a legacy. He ascended the steps of his ivory tower where, surrounded by hundreds of books, he would write his magnum opus. As he wrote, he realized there were gaps in his knowledge. So he set about doing more research to fill those gaps so that his work would be complete. He became so obsessed with his work that he slept little and often forgot to eat. He ignored such niceties as taking care of personal hygiene. Eventually his obsession got the better of him, and he was discovered one day slumped over his desk, deceased. The person who found him gave him a respectable burial, and then set about cleaning up the mess in the ivory tower. Over 1,000 pages of handwritten manuscript were scattered about the room, but the material was so disorganized he could not make any sense of it. He gathered it up, disposed of the manuscript, and sold off the vast library to pay for the expenses of the deceased. So, that's the bonus episode of my bonus episode. We'll see you next time as we continue contemplating life. Fly safe, everyone.